Maplewood Heights was the kind of neighborhood that looked like it had been plucked straight out of a glossy real estate brochure. The streets were lined with towering maple trees, their leaves turning a fiery red and orange in the fall. The houses were a mix of colonial and modern designs, each one meticulously maintained. There was a community pool, a clubhouse, and even a small park with a playground for the kids. On paper, it was the perfect place to live. When Sarah Mitchell first moved into Maplewood Heights, she was thrilled. She had just landed a new job in the city, and after months of searching, she had finally found a home that felt like it could be her forever place. The realtor, a cheerful woman named Linda, had gushed about the community. "It's a wonderful place to live," Linda had said. "Friendly neighbors, great amenities, and a very active homeowners association that keeps everything running smoothly." What Linda hadn't mentioned was the HOA president, Margaret "Maggie" Thompson. Sarah's first encounter with Maggie happened just 2 weeks after she moved in. She had decided to plant a row of sunflowers along her fence line, thinking it would add a cheerful touch to her backyard. She had spent the entire weekend digging, planting, and watering, and by Sunday evening, her sunflowers were standing tall, their bright yellow faces turned toward the sun. On Monday morning, Sarah returned from work to find a bright pink envelope taped to her front door. Inside was a notice from the Maplewood Heights Homeowners Association. MS. Mitchell, the notice began, "Your unauthorized landscaping modifications constitute a direct violation of Maplewood Heights Covenant Section 7.3. Please remove these plants within 48 hours or face ado la $250 fine. Regards, Margaret Thompson, HOA President." Sarah was stunned. She had no idea there were restrictions on what she could plant in her own yard. She called the number listed on the notice, hoping to explain that she hadn't been aware of the rules. "Rules exist for a reason, MS. Mitchell," Maggie said when Sarah reached her. Her tone was cold and condescending. "I suggest you familiarize yourself with our bylaws immediately. They were pro-VY dead during your closing." The bylaws, as it turned out, were a 400-page document filled with legalese and microscopic text. Sarah spent the next 2 days poring over the document, trying to make sense of it. In the end, she reluctantly removed the sunflowers and replaced them with a row of bland, HOA-approved shrubs. But that was just the beginning. Over the next few months, Sarah received violation notices for everything imaginable. Her grass was a 1/4 inch too tall. Her garbage bin was left out 4 hours after collection. Her garden hose was VY-sible from a street. Each violation came with increasingly steep fines, and any attempt to appeal was met with bureaucratic resistance. Maggie Thompson ruled the HOA with an iron fist. She had stacked the 5-person board with her friends, creating an impenetrable wall of suburban tyranny. The board meetings were a farce, with Maggie steamrolling any opposition and her cronies nodding in agreement. Sarah, an accountant by profession, had a keen eye for numbers and processes. After VYing her 3rd fine in a month this time for VYing a rain barrel that was an unapproved shade of green, she decided to take a closer look at the HOA's financial statements, which were reluctantly made available to residents upon written request. What she found was concerning, to say the least. The association's reserve fund, money set aside for major repairs and improvements, had been steadily decreasing despite no significant projects being completed. The annual budgets showed line items for administrative expenses that had tripled over the past 3 years, with no explanation. Most troubling was a consulting fee paid quarterly to Thompson Management Sarah VYCS, a company registered to Maggie's husband, Walter. Sarah took her findings to several neighbors who had also grown tired of Maggie's heavy-handed approach. Together, they formed a small coalition and began attending HOA meetings, asking pointed questions about the financial discrepancies. Maggie dismissed their concerns with phrases like, "These are complex matters beyond the understanding of most residents, and the board has unanimously approved all expenditures." She would look down at them over her reading glasses, her perfectly styled blonde bob never MOVYing out of place, as she shook her head at their supposed ignorance. Then came the bombshell. At the January meeting, Maggie announced that due to infrastructure upgrades and administrative requirements, monthly HOA fees would increase from 150 150 to 3,000 per household, effective in 60 days. The room erupted into chaos. For most residents, this would mean an additional due of $34,200 per year more than many of their mortgage payments. "This is outrageous," shouted Mr. Patel, a normally quiet man who had been pushed to his limit. "What upgrades could possibly justify this?" Maggie smiled with false patience and spoke in a patronizing tone. "If you had attended the planning committee meetings, you would know that we're implementing comprehensive security measures and a complete landscaping renovation. The board has reviewed several proposals and selected the most appropriate vendor. The vendor, as it turned out, was another company with ties to Maggie's family. This was the final straw. Sarah went home that night and pulled out the HOA's articles of incorporation and bylaws, searching for anything that might help them fight back. What she found changed everything. According to state law and their own bylaws, fee increases exceeding 20 fan tram required a 2/3 vote from all homeowners, not just the board. Furthermore, board members were required to disclose any potential conflicts of interest and recuse themselves for related votes. Maggie had done neither. But the most interesting detail was buried in Article 4, Section 12. The treasurer shall be elected by a simple majority of homeowners present at the annual meeting. Their current treasurer, a timid man named Doug who rubber-stamped whatever Maggie wanted, had announced his resignation due to relocation. The annual meeting was scheduled for the following week, before the fee increase would take effect. Sarah submitted her name for consideration as treasurer, citing her professional qualifications as a certified public accountant. Maggie called her that evening, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Sarah, I was surprised to see your application for treasurer. That's quite ambitious for someone who can't even remember to bring in her garbage bins on time." "Just trying to do my part for the community, Maggie," Sarah replied calmly, biting back the sarcastic remark that threatened to escape. "Well, I should inform you that we already have a candidate in mind. Melissa from Oakwood Drive has expressed interest, and she has the board's full support." Melissa, Sarah later learned, was Maggie's sister-in-law. Sarah spent the next week going door to door, introducing herself to neighbors and explaining her qualifications. She also gently mentioned her concerns about the financial management of their HOA and the impending fee increase. Many residents were unaware of the details, as Maggie had strategically scheduled meetings at inconvenient times and buried important announcements in lengthy emails. The night of the annual meeting arrived, and attendance was unprecedented. Normally, 15 or 20 regulars would show up, but tonight the community center was packed with over 150 homeowners. Maggie looked visibly surprised as homeowner after homeowner filed into the room, her usual confidence momentarily faltering. When the time came to elect the new treasurer, Maggie attempted to rush through the process. "As there are two candidates, we'll take a quick show of hands. All in favor of Melissa Johnson." "Point of order," Sarah interrupted, standing up with a copy of the bylaws in hand. "According to our governing documents, elections must be conducted by secret ballot when multiple candidates are running. Additionally, I'd like to exercise my right as a candidate to make a 3-minute statement before voting begins." Maggie's face flushed red, but with so many witnesses, she couldn't ignore proper procedure. Sarah approached the front of the room, feeling the eyes of every homeowner on her. "Many of you know me as the woman from Cedar Lane who once had unauthorized sunflowers," she began, which drew a few chuckles. "But professionally, I'm a senior accountant with 15 years of experience in financial management and auditing. I'm running for treasurer because I believe our HOA needs greater transparency and fiscal responsibility." She then outlined, in broad terms, the financial discrepancies she had found and her plan to implement proper controls. She concluded by addressing the proposed fee increase. "I cannot, in good conscience, support raising our fees by nearly 2,000 fan tram without a clear, itemized justification and competitive bidding process. If elected, my first action will be to conduct a complete audit and present the findings to all homeowners." The room was silent when she finished. Maggie quickly called for Melissa to make her statement, but her vague promises of continuing the board's excellent work fell flat. When the secret ballots were counted, Sarah had won by a landslide 87 fan-tram of the votes. Maggie's smile had completely disappeared as she stiffly congratulated her. "We welcome Sarah to the board, but remind her that the treasurer serves at the pleasure of the president and must work within established protocols," she said through gritted teeth. "I look forward to working with everyone," Sarah responded diplomatically. "Now, as my first official act, I'd like to re-VYEW the proposed fee increase and the contracts associated with the planned upgrades." Maggie attempted to defer the discussion. "Those items have already been approved by the board. We can bring you up to speed in our executive session next month," she said dismissively, while VYing her hand as if shooing away a pesky fly. "Actually," Sarah countered, pulling out another highlighted section of the bylaws, "as treasurer, I have a fiduciary duty to re-VYEW all financial commitments before they're finalized. Additionally, the fee increase requires a homeowner vote since it exceeds the threshold specified in our governing documents." The room erupted in applause, and Sarah could see Maggie's perfectly manicured nails digging into her palms as she forced a tight smile. "We'll set up a time for you to re-VYEW the documents, then," Maggie conceded, her voice strained. Over the next week, Sarah delved into the HOA's financial records. What she found was worse than she had initially suspected. Maggie had been running the association like her personal fiefdom, directing contracts to friends and family at inflated prices and using association fund for questionable expenses. The comprehensive security measures turned out to be an unnecessary 1.2 M I L L I O N C O N T R A C T V I T Ush E R B R O T Ush E R minus I N minus L A V S C O M P A N Y V Ush I L E T Ush E L A N D S C A P I N G R E N O V A T I O N V A S A N 1.2 million contract with her brother Minus in Minus Law. Scumpany, while the landscaping renovation weighs in 800,000 agreement with her cousin's firm both several times the market rate. But that wasn't all. Sarah discovered expense reports for board retreats at luxury resorts, a Dula 115,000 office renovation for the HOA's tiny administrative room that primarily consisted of an Italian leather chair for Maggie and countless meals at high-end restaurants classified as community outreach meetings. Most disturbing was a pattern of selective enforcement. While some homeowners were aggressively fined for minor infractions, properties owned by Maggie's friends and family had violations that were consistently overlooked. Sarah prepared a detailed report and called for an emergency meeting of homeowners, sending notices through every available channel. Despite Maggie's attempts to discredit her, including a mass email suggesting Sarah was undermining community safety and lacking the experience to understand complex community management, the turnout was even larger than at the election. With precision, Sarah presented her findings, using clear charts and easy-to-understand explanations. She showed how their reserve fund had been systematically drained through overpriced contracts and questionable expenses. She revealed that Maggie had authorized payments to her family members' companies without disclosing these relationships to the board or recusing herself from voting clear violations of both their bylaws and state law. Based on these findings, Sarah concluded, "I recommend we immediately cancel the pending contracts, rescind the fee increase, and engage an independent auditor to conduct a complete re-VYEW of our finances for the past 5 years. Maggie stood up, her face contorted with rage. "This is a witch hunt," she shouted, her composure finally cracking. "You've been treasurer for barely a week. What could you possibly know about running an HOA? These contracts are necessary for our community's well-being. The security system will protect our children. The landscaping will maintain our property values. I know enough about financial management to recognize self-dealing when I see it," Sarah replied evenly. "And I know that our bylaws prohibit board members from profiting from their positions." The room erupted into angry murmurs as homeowners processed what they were hearing. A motion was quickly proposed to freeze all new contracts pending an audit, which passed unanimously except for Maggie and the 2 board members related to her. Maggie's world began unraveling quickly after that. The independent auditors Sarah brought in confirmed her findings and uncovered even more financial improprieties. Following their recommendation, they reported the matter to the district attorney's office, which opened an investigation into possible embezzlement and fraud. Throughout this process, Maggie's behavior became increasingly erratic. She sent late-night emails accusing Sarah of conducting a personal vendetta. She attempted to schedule board meetings without notifying her. When those tactics failed, she tried a different approach, inviting Sarah to lunch to clear the air and suggesting that perhaps they could find common ground that would be mutually beneficial. The implied bribe was as transparent as it was desperate. At the special meeting called to address the audit findings, the atmosphere was tense. Maggie sat stone-faced as the auditor presented evidence that she had misappropriated overdue lot $240,000 in HOA funds over the past 4 years. The documentation was meticulous, showing how Maggie had written checks to herself disguised as reimbursements for non-existent expenses, awarded contracts to family members at inflated prices, and used association credit card for personal purchases ranging from spa treatments to a family vacation to Maui, all classified as community management expenses. In light of these findings, Sarah stated after the presentation concluded, "I move to remove Maggie Thompson as president of the board for violations of fiduciary duty and conflicts of interest pro-VY signs in our bylaws." The vote was immediate and decisive. As the tallied results were announced, 127 in favor. 3 opposed. Maggie's face transformed from confidence to disbelief. "This is ridiculous," she shouted, standing up abruptly and knocking over a chair. "You can't do this. I built this community. I've sacrificed everything for Maplewood Heights. You ungrateful people have no idea what it takes to maintain standards." "The community has spoken, Maggie," Sarah replied calmly. "And according to the audit, it seems the sacrifice has been mostly on our Sedetto, the tune of nearly $250,000. Maggie grabbed her designer handbag and stormed toward the exit. "You'll be hearing from my attorney," she threatened, her voice trembling with barely controlled fury. "This isn't over. You have no idea who you're dealing with." "Actually, it is," responded the association's newly hired attorney, who had been quietly observing from the back. "Mrs. Thompson, I've been instructed to inform you that the association will be filing a CIVYL suit to recover the misappropriated funds. The paperwork will be served tomorrow morning. Additionally, the district attorney has indicated they're considering criminal charges for financial fraud and embezzlement." Maggie froze in the doorway, her shoulders suddenly slumping as the reality of her situation crashed down upon her. The room watched in stunned silence as the woman who had ruled their community with an iron fist for years finally faced the consequences of her actions. Her mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. The color drained from her face as she clutched her handbag tighter, her knuckles turning white. Finally, with a strangled sob, she turned and fled the building. Through the windows, they could see her fumbling with her car keys, mascara streaming down her face as the empire she had built on intimidation and manipulation crumbled around her. Her hands were shaking so badly, she dropped the keys twice before managing to unlock her luxury SUV purchased, they now knew, with the fruits of her financial misconduct. As she drove away, tires screeching in the parking lot, there was a collective sigh of relief throughout the room. The reign of terror was over. The next morning, Maggie's husband came to collect her personal items from the HOA office. He avoided eye contact as he emptied her desk, his face grim with embarrassment. Word had already spread throughout their professional circle. Maggie worked as a real estate agent at a prestigious firm in town, specializing in luxury properties. By noon, her profile had been removed from the company website, another casualty of her crumbling facade. 3 days later, the local newspaper ran a front-page story about the investigation, complete with details of the financial mismanagement and quotes from outraged residents. Maggie's carefully cultivated image as a community leader was shattered overnight. Former friends and associates quickly distanced themselves, not wanting to be tainted by association. The final blow came when the CIVYL suit was filed. The detailed complaint outlined years of systematic abuse, with damages totaling overdue law $350,000 when interest and legal fees were included. Maggie's attorney attempted to negotiate a settlement, but the board under Sarah's financial guidance stood firm. The message was clear: this behavior would not be tolerated, nor would it be quietly swept under the rug. Sarah saw Maggie one last time a week after her removal. She was walking her dog past Maggie's house when she emerged to collect her mail. Gone was the perfectly coiffed power dresser who had terrorized the neighborhood. Instead, Sarah saw a woman in sweatpants, her hair unbrushed, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. When Maggie spotted Sarah, she froze momentarily before hurrying back inside, slamming the door with enough force to make the windows rattle. It gave Sarah no pleasure to see Maggie reduced to this state, but as she continued her walk through the neighborhood past homes, where people could now plant whatever flowers they wanted without fear of ridiculous fines, she couldn't help but reflect on the power of accountability. Their monthly HOA fees were back to a reasonable due law $150. Their reserve fund was being properly managed, and for the first time in years, people were smiling and chatting in their front yards instead of hurrying inside to avoid potential violations. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't dramatic or flashy. It's simply ensuring that the rules apply equally to everyone, especially those who once thought themselves above them. As for Maggie, Sarah heard through the grapevine that she had received notice of the district attorney's decision to pursue criminal charges. The recommended sentence included not just substantial fines, but potential jail time for the more serious counts of financial fraud. When the news broke, Maggie's lawyer made a last-ditch effort to negotiate a plea deal, but the prosecutor, bolstered by their meticulous financial records and the testimony of former board members who had been bullied into compliance, refused to budge. The case was simply too clear-cut, the evidence too damning to ignore. 2 weeks later, Sarah received a certified letter from Maggie's attorney. Inside was a settlement offer. Maggie would plead guilty to reduced charges, make full restitution plus interest, and resign permanently from any community leadership position in exchange for the HOA dropping the CIVYL suit. Attached was a personal note from Maggie herself, the handwriting shaky and uneven. "Please make this stop. My life is ruined. Isn't that enough?" Sarah brought the offer to their next board meeting. The discussion was lengthy and sometimes heated, with opinions divided between those seeking maximum punishment and others satisfied with financial recovery. In the end, they voted to accept the settlement with one additional condition. Maggie would need to make a public apology at the next homeowners meeting. When the day came, the community center was packed again. Maggie entered through the side door, a shadow of her former self. Gone were the designer clothes and commanding presence. Instead, she wore a simple black dress and couldn't seem to lift her eyes from the floor as she made her way to the podium. She began, her voice barely audible. She cleared her throat and tried again. "I stand before you today to acknowledge my wrongdoing and accept full responsibility for my actions as your former HOA president." Her prepared statement was brief but comprehensive, admitting to the financial misconduct, the nepotism, the abuse of power, and expressing regret for the harm she had caused. As she turned to leave after finishing her statement, someone called out from the back of the room, "Why, Maggie? We trusted you." She paused, her back still to the audience, shoulders hunched. For a moment, Sarah thought she might ignore the question and continue walking. Instead, Maggie slowly turned around and, for the first time that evening, raised her eyes to meet those of her former neighbors. "Because I could," she said, her voice suddenly clear and bitter. "Because none of you were paying attention. Because it was so easy, and you all just complied." Her gaze swept the room, lingering briefly on Sarah, until someone finally did their homework. With that, she walked out, leaving a stunned silence in her wake. The prosecutor called Sarah the next morning to confirm that Maggie had signed the plea agreement. She would avoid jail time, but would be on probation for 5 years and would pay restitution of due law $437,000 to account for all misappropriated funds, interest, and legal fees. Her real estate license was suspended indefinitely, and her reputation in the community was irreparably damaged. As Sarah hung up the phone, she felt an unexpected weight lift from her shoulders. What had begun as a simple desire to avoid an exorbitant fee increase had turned into a full-blown reckoning with corruption. Maggie's final words haunted her somewhat. "Because none of you were paying attention." A stark reminder of how easily power can be abused when no one is watching the watchers. That afternoon, Sarah submitted their HOA's said financial policies to the board, including mandatory annual audits, competitive bidding for all contracts over due law $5,000, and transparent reporting to all homeowners. The days of unchecked authority were over. As for Maggie, Sarah occasionally glimpsed her around town at the grocery store or gas station, always alone, always quick to avoid eye contact. The transformation was remarkable. From the imperious HOA president who once made neighbors tremble with her pink violation notices to a cautionary tale of hubris and downfall. Her husband filed for divorce 6 months later, unable to weather the financial and social fallout of her actions. The last Sarah heard, Maggie had put her house on the market. The irony was that the very regulations she had enforced so ruthlessly now made it difficult for her to sell quickly. Every potential buyer received full disclosure about the recent scandals, as legally required. The property remained unsold for nearly a year before finally selling at well below market value. On the day the sold sign appeared, Sarah happened to be driving past, as Maggie Super VY said, the movers loading the last of her possessions. Their eyes met briefly through the car window, and for a moment, Sarah thought she saw a flicker of recognition, perhaps even a grudging respect. Then Maggie's expression hardened, and she turned away. Sarah didn't feel victorious as she drove on, just satisfied that justice had been served. Sometimes, standing up to a bully isn't about becoming a hero. It's simply about being unwilling to be a Tim. And sometimes, the most effective revolution is simply following the rules that were already in place, especially against those who believe the rules never applied to them. If you were the one in this story, how would you react? Would you stand up and fight back, or accept the unreasonable pressure and control from the HOA? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this video with more people. Your small action gives us the motivation to keep bringing you more intense and engaging stories. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.